Hello everyone, it's Mimi here. BMS working in the NHS. And today's video will be about electron microscopy, which is part of the IBMS specialist portfolio in cellular pathology. So, just a quick introduction to this video. It will be short and sweet, I promise. I will discuss knowledge requirements, competence requirements, reflective statement, evidence of achievement, Q&A suggestions, evidence ideas, and some helpful tips to make candidates' portfolio really good. With all that said, I hope you will enjoy the content of my video and I hope you will learn a lot. So let's dive into the second subsection of the fifth section, microscopy and image capture, called electron microscopy. The knowledge requirement explains what knowledge is expected of the candidate in relation to the relevant subsection. Candidates should be able to demonstrate their knowledge at the specialist level. Think about what knowledge they had as a Band 5 BMS. How would that differ to the knowledge of a Band 6 BMS? That specialist level of knowledge would allow the candidate to troubleshoot, problem solve, verify or validate. The first knowledge requirement is principles of electron microscopy. Candidate needs to have the knowledge and understanding about electron microscopy. You could ask the candidate to explain, what is electron microscopy and how it works, to name the key principles of electron microscopy, to differentiate between TEM and SEM. Addressing this knowledge requirement, candidates should consider parts like electron source that generate beam of electrons, acceleration to move electrons down the column, vacuum to prevent electron scattering, electromagnetic lenses to focus electron beam, specimen interaction with electrons to create contrast, detection and image formation, width and resolution, difference between TEM and SEM. The second knowledge requirement is clinical applications of transmission electron microscopy in diagnostic techniques. Candidate needs to have the knowledge and understanding about application of TEM. You could ask the candidate to explain, what is TEM and how it works, to name the clinical applications of TEM in diagnostics, name diseases that can be diagnosed or investigated using TEM. When addressing this knowledge requirement, candidates should consider application of TEM as diagnostic technique, kidney diseases like podocytopathies or glomerulonephritis, neuromuscular disorders, tumors of poor differentiation, ciliary abnormalities, infectious disease by visualizing viruses and microorganisms, metabolic and storage diseases. The third knowledge requirement is applications of scanning electron microscopy in diagnostic techniques. Candidate needs to have the knowledge and understanding about application of SEM. You could ask the candidate to explain, what is SEM and how it works, to name the clinical applications of SEM in diagnostics, to name disease can be diagnosed or investigated using SEM. When addressing this knowledge requirement, candidates should consider application of SEM as diagnostic technique, tissue analysis by visualizing ultrastructural details, intracellular components and deposits, surface topography analysis, assessing muscle, nerve and renal tissues, detecting infectious agents like viruses, oncology, and tumor assessment, especially poorly differentiated tumors. The fourth knowledge requirement is principles and application of associated techniques. Candidate needs to have the knowledge and understanding about associated techniques. You could ask the candidate to name the techniques associated with electron microscopy, to explain their principles, to explain their application. When addressing this knowledge requirement, candidates should consider tissue preparation, fixation, dehydration, infiltration, ultramicrotomy, staining with heavy metals or negative staining, imaging modalities like TEM or transmission electron microscopy, SEM or scanning electron microscopy, STEM or scanning transmission electron microscopy, electron tomography or immunoelectron microscopy. Competence requirement is basically a combination of knowledge, skills, and experience candidate needs to perform a job to a satisfactory standard. Candidates' chosen evidence should demonstrate these competence requirements. The following competence requirements need to be met for this subsection. The first competence requirement is prepare semi-thin and ultra-thin sections for electron microscopy. Candidates should be able to prepare sections for EM. Can the candidate prepare semi-thin and ultra-thin sections for EM? Do they take the correct steps when preparing those sections? When addressing this competence requirement, candidate could consider their training and competence, SOPs and methodology used, instruments used, knives, sample trimming and ultra-sectioning, section thickness, interference colors, staining and purpose of semi-thin and ultra-thin sections. The second competence requirement is prepare electron microscopy images from prepared samples. Candidate should be able to prepare EM images. Does the candidate create electron microscope images correctly? Do they follow the correct steps? Do they troubleshoot problems with image preparation? When addressing this competence requirement, candidate could consider their training and competence, SOPs and method used, instruments used, sample loading, electron beam, detectors, visualization, SEM versus TEM. Each section also contains reflective statement which is asking the candidate to summarize their role in the lab and the context with each section. When they complete all the subsections within each section, they will be required to write a reflective statement. They also need to write a personal reflection on their training and why they chose their evidence. To prepare for that, ask them to write a smaller reflective statement for each subsection. What is their role and context of this subsection within the lab? What does their evidence demonstrate? Ask them to write a smaller justification as to why they chose their evidence for this subsection. Also ask them to write about what was their training like when to this subsection. Writing a smaller reflective statement at the end of each subsection will then make it much easier for them at the end of the section. Each subsection also has evidence of achievement. This is a part where you, the training officer, sign the candidate off as competent and fit to practice as a BMS at the specialist level. By doing that, you will confirm that the candidate can work in accordance with local SOPs relevant to this subsection. This will also confirm that candidate has answered questions set by you to test their knowledge and skills relevant to this subsection. And you will also confirm that candidate's chosen evidence demonstrates their competence, relevant to this subsection. The candidate will need to be signed off as competent by an internal assessor for each subsection. They can be signed off by you, the training officer, senior BMS overseeing relevant section, or by the training lead. These are some example questions you could give your candidate to test their knowledge and skills about this subsection. These should be based around the knowledge and skill requirements mentioned earlier. These are some more example questions you can ask your candidate to complete, to test their knowledge and skills about this subsection. Supporting evidence should be selected by the candidate. It needs to be based around the competency requirements, and be relevant for each subsection. The evidence should allow the candidate to demonstrate their competence in each subsection. It should be specific and relevant to the candidate's in-house practice. It should also demonstrate candidate's specialist competence. If you would like to see specific ideas for supportive evidence, please have a look at the video for trainees. Link will be included in the video description. I would also like to share with you some helpful tips that can make candidates' portfolio look really good. Ask them to try and present the information in various formats such as tables, pictures, photographs, diagrams, flowcharts, graphs, or even videos, if they can. This nicely breaks down a lot of text that is usually present in specialist portfolios. Ask them to try and make it a little bit more interesting to the reader, which will be you, and eventually the assessor. Ask them to try and put themselves in your or the assessor's shoes. How would they like to read hundreds of pages of plain text? There is a saying I really like, and it goes like this: a picture 1,000 words. I will make a video where I will share with you my evidence I used for my portfolio back in the day. Hopefully that will help. Also ask them to try and use various types of evidence, not just one type, like case studies, for each subsection. They could use experiments, case studies, annotated results, annotated photographs of them performing tasks, evidence of troubleshooting, annotated EQA results, nonconformances, validation verification evidence, comparisons of different approaches and their pros and cons, control material production, certificates of course attendance with reflective statements, annotated images or charts, and so on. Ask them to try and bring in their personality. Ask them to think about the ways they like to learn best. If experimenting, let them perform experiments. If they like troubleshooting, let them perform troubleshooting. Ask them to choose something that demonstrates their specialist understanding, knowledge, and skills, and how they apply this in their practice. And one more thing, ask them to keep the competence requirements in mind when they are selecting their evidence. Good evidence will tick off several requirements. And this brings me to the end of today's video. Hopefully you now have a better understanding about the knowledge and competence requirements for this subsection. And I hope you also have a better idea what questions you can choose to test candidates' knowledge. And my final take-home message? Keep those requirements in mind when selecting questions and guiding the candidate. Bye for now.